All right, let's get right into it. The US government just pulled the trigger on a massive deal with Argentina. We're talking up to $40 billion. But as you're about to see, this is way more than just a simple bailout. This is a story with a huge twist.
$40 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering amount of money. And a number that big, well, it forces us to ask a really important question. So what's the deal here? Is the US just being incredibly generous to a country that's in a tough spot? Or is there something else going on behind the curtain? Something with massive global implications?
To really get what's happening, we have to look past that giant headline number and break down what this deal actually is. So let's start with the basics of this so-called bailout. First thing you need to know, this is absolutely not free money. Not a gift. The whole thing is what's called a currency swap. Think of it like a short-term loan. The US hands over billions of dollars, and Argentina puts up its own currency, the peso, as collateral. And you better believe they have to pay this back, with interest. So why on earth would Argentina take on a loan this big? Well, to put it mildly, their economy is in a complete nosedive. We're talking about inflation that's just through the roof, and a currency that's basically in free fall. They are desperate for US dollars just to buy essential stuff on the world market, like energy, and to stop their own currency from becoming totally worthless.
But helping out Argentina, that's really only half the story. And honestly, it's not even the interesting half. This is where we get to the real game being played. A high-stakes global currency war.
So what was the real motive here? Yeah, it wasn't about charity. One source put it as plainly as possible. It's for control. This whole deal was a strategic chess move in an ongoing economic war with China. See, China had already made its own smaller loan to Argentina, trying to gain influence in the region. So let's put these two heavyweights in the ring. In one corner, you've got the US dollar, the undisputed champion, the world's reserve currency, backed by the biggest economy and the most powerful military on the planet. And in the other corner, you have the challenger, the Chinese Yuan. It's gaining ground, for sure, but it just doesn't have that same level of global trust, at least not yet. And believe me, China has a very clear playbook for how they plan to win. They're pushing their influence into places like South America, offering these exact same kinds of currency swaps to countries in trouble. And at the same time, they are buying up physical gold at a mind-blowing pace to back up their currency. It's all part of a long-term strategy to knock the dollar off its throne.
Okay, so we know the why behind this move, but that raises another massive question. Where in the world did the US government suddenly find an extra $40 billion? Let's take a look inside the secret money pot.
Now, this money didn't come from some big bill that was debated and passed by Congress. Nope. It came from something called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, or the ESF. This is a special reserve fund that was set up way back in 1934. And here's the kicker. For a loan like this, it can operate without any direct approval from Congress. It's basically a government slush fund that works outside of the usual checks and balances. And the fact that this fund operates in the shadows is a huge deal, especially when you look at the government's own finances. Right now, the government is bringing in about $5 trillion in revenue, but it's spending almost $7 trillion. It's already having to borrow money just to keep the lights on. And all that borrowing, well, it adds up. $38 trillion. That's the current US national debt. So when you're already that deep in the hole, coming up with another $40 billion for a loan, it's not exactly like finding some spare change under the couch cushions. And here's the part that should really get your attention. You know what the fastest growing expense is for the US government? It's not the military, it's not social programs, it's the interest it has to pay on the money it's already borrowed. That means more and more of our tax dollars are just going to service old debt, not pay for things we need today. I know, this all sounds so big, so global, but these massive geopolitical events have very real consequences that can ripple all the way down and affect you. So let's bring this home. Let's talk about your wallet and your move. Look, these huge power struggles always create a flow of money, always. And if you know where to look, you can actually see where that money is heading. So we're going to spotlight 3 key areas to watch: gold, lithium, and bonds. First up, gold. If you've been watching the price of gold hit one record high after another, well, this currency war is a huge piece of that puzzle. Why? Because central banks, particularly China's, are hoarding physical gold to back their own currencies and create a real alternative to the dollar. It's that massive institutional demand that's pushing the price through the roof.
Number 2, lithium. And this brings us right back to Argentina. It turns out Argentina sits on a massive chunk of the world's lithium reserves in a place called the Lithium Triangle. We need lithium for everything, especially batteries. A stable Argentinian economy, propped up by the US, could absolutely supercharge its lithium mining industry.
And finally, number 3, bonds. Now, lending money to a government like Argentina's is risky, but high risk can mean high returns. And with the US stepping in to backstop the economy, those bonds could suddenly look a lot more stable. Now, buying individual Argentinian bonds is tricky for most people, but you can get exposure through something called emerging market bond funds, which basically package up debt from lots of developing countries. So here's the crucial takeaway. Every single major geopolitical event, every single one, creates a tidal wave of money. The smart investor doesn't just read the headlines. They figure out where that money is moving and, more importantly, why.
Which really brings us to one final, critical question we all have to ask ourselves about our own money. In a world of escalating currency wars and out-of-control government debt, maybe, just maybe, standing still is the biggest risk of all.